Happy Thursday, everyone. We've almost made it to the weekend. I hope your week has been as good as mine has, and I do hope that you're ready for more cozy horror with me, Dr. Plague. Let's get you some great stories to ease you into your Thursday with some great times and some great tales. Our topic of discussion today is dogs. Those furry, four-footed friends that we all seem to enjoy so much. So let's hear some stories about good dogs, bad dogs, and everything in between. Let's start out with a story about a man who's walking a dog, sometimes, and stumbles across a strange object that confuses his furry friend as much as him. Let's hear a story about the thrift store mannequin. There's a thrift store on the corner of Maryland and Decatur. It's not a very big place, basically just a storefront with a big window and about 1,000 square feet of shop space to play around with. They don't stock the latest brands. They mostly sell whatever they get from donations. But the mannequin in the window never fails to catch my eye. I've been taking that route to work since I got hired 5 years ago. Every day I walk past that thrift store, and every day I look up to see what that mannequin is wearing. It's always different, and I think the owner dresses him in something new before the store opens every day. Sometimes it's seasonal. He'll dress the mannequin up in a Santa Claus suit or a witch costume. But sometimes it's more weather-related. I've seen the mannequin in rain slickers and welly boots during rainy months, or in sundresses and sandals when it's warm out. The mannequin is nothing special. It's just a regular department store mannequin, but he seems to have enough legs and arms to put it in different positions to match what it's wearing. It's become my little ritual every day, and I enjoy it. So today, when I walked past the window and noticed what the mannequin was wearing, it stopped me in my tracks. The mannequin was dressed in a white button-up shirt with slacks and a pair of wingtips. He had a jacket over his arm, a blue windbreaker, and a briefcase in his hand. He appeared to be checking his wristwatch for the time, and as I saw him, it led me to look at my own watch as if mimicking him. The mannequin was wearing exactly what I was wearing. I work as an accountant, and my dress is usually pretty standard for the office setting. To see it on a mannequin, this particular one not even having a face, made me stop and take a long look at it. I laughed. It was a little absurd. I suppose maybe the owner had an excess of business wear that he needed to get rid of. Maybe he was hoping to move a few pairs of suit pants and some wingtips, and made a mental note to stop by on my way home to see if I could pick up a few new items for my wardrobe. The windbreaker was an odd touch. I'd never seen one exactly like that one, but it's probably a coincidence, just like the rest. I didn't actually stop by that day, but as I had to walk to work the next day, I found myself looking at the mannequin to see what it had on. I was surprised to find it was nearly the same as it had been the day before. White button-down shirt, suit pants, briefcase, and a windbreaker over its arm. The one change was the shoes. It wasn't wearing wingtips today, and neither was I. I decided on a more comfortable pair of sneakers today. The mannequin was wearing the same New Balance shoes that I was, and that made me look at it a little harder. Couldn't imagine how the owner was matching the mannequin to me every day, but it was a neat little surprise. I went to work with a smile on my face, again thinking that I might stop in to see if he had any business wear before I went home. I didn't make it that day either, but I did stop in the next day. The next day was Saturday, and I had decided to go for a walk with my dog, Rusty. I was not in my usual business attire. I was wearing the windbreaker that I usually carried, and I had a pair of jeans on and some running shoes, a t-shirt for a band that I'd liked since high school. It wasn't a very popular band, something obscure that I was pretty sure me and maybe 5 or 6 people had heard of, but it was a shirt that I had meticulously kept clean and taken care of. My eyes went to the mannequin in the window, and as it came into sight, I stopped in my tracks. The mannequin was standing there in the exact same clothes that I was, and it even appeared to be walking a stuffed dog on a purple leash, which was the same kind that I was walking my dog on. I couldn't process what I was seeing for a moment. This couldn't be real. How had he found a copy of not just my dog, though this one was stuffed, but also the super obscure band t-shirt that I was wearing? The longer I looked at him, the more sure I was that his face was a little bit different, too. There seemed to be dimensions there that were different from the flat, obscure planes that had been there before. This took me a little aback, and I finally decided to go into the store and ask the owner about it. The owner was an old man named Mr. Tully. He was a guy who could have been anywhere from 40 to 60, and he always had these thick glasses that reminded me of Bubbles from Trailer Park Boys. He looked at me as I came in, smiling as he asked me what he could help me with. Rusty was standing beside me, making this low, keening noise, as if he could sense that I was agitated, and when I pointed to the mannequin in the window, both my dog and the owner seemed confused. I want to know why that mannequin is wearing the same clothes that I am. Mr. Tully scratched his head and looked at the dummy that he had clearly dressed before setting out for the day. "Oh, one of my assistants must have done it. Truth be told, I haven't dressed that dummy in close to a year. I usually have one of the boys in the back put some clothes on it before the start of day. He does look like you. That is weird. Do you want to buy any of the clothes on him? Maybe get a few more pieces for your wardrobe?" I didn't know what to say. I ended up telling him I was sorry that I had made a fuss and just leaving. It was so odd that I really wasn't sure what to make of it. It's not every day that you walk in to find a mannequin wearing exactly what you're wearing, and I guess it caught me by surprise. The idea that he looked exactly like me, however, was one that wouldn't go away quite so quickly. I thought about it a lot as I went about my day, and that night I even dreamed about it. In my dream, I was standing there and watching the mannequin from the street. The longer I watched him, the more his features began to change in my mind. Around me, it looked like days were passing, and the sun moved like it was in fast motion. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak, but the longer I looked at the mannequin, the more I realized that my own features were melting away. It took a minute. I was fully focused on the mannequin's face, but when I caught a glimpse of myself in the window glass, I could see that I was the one with the smooth face, and he was suddenly the one wearing my expression. I woke up tangled in my covers, and no amount of assuring myself that it hadn't been real would make me believe it. Every day, as I went to and from work, I would look into the window of that thrift store and see if the mannequin had changed. Every day, he'd be wearing the exact same thing I was wearing, and it definitely gave me pause every time. I wanted to go ask Mr. Tully again about the strange nature of the display, but I just never worked up the courage. The dreams began to change a little too. Sometimes I would have the sidewalk dream, but sometimes I would almost feel that I had woken up and found him in my room. It was like being under the spell of a paralysis demon, and all I could do was lie there as the mannequin stood in the shadowy corners of my room and watched me sleep. He was never there in the morning, but the dreams were still very unsettling, regardless of which ones I had. The longer I took notice of him, the more I realized he was beginning to get a face to go along with my clothes. He was slowly growing a nose, eyes, a mouth that drooped slightly like mine did when I was injured or angry. With every outfit he wore, he would come to resemble me more and more. and I found that the transition was not one-sided. I too had begun to feel less than myself. I felt weak, like I might be getting sick, and I began to get lethargic. I started taking off work, started sitting in my apartment and not doing anything. Rusty would come up and nudge me with his head, but I couldn't bring myself to do much more than mundane tasks. Feed the dog, wash myself, feed myself, then sit on the couch and try to remember what my life had been like before I saw that mannequin. Then a few days ago, as I was working on my second week of sick leave, Rusty came up and nudged my hand, and I looked down at him for the first time in a while. I've been feeding him, been cleaning up his messes, but the way he looked at me told me that he was beginning to see life the way I did, and that hurt me somehow. Just because I was losing my mind didn't mean that Rusty needed to suffer too. On a whim, I grabbed his leash and decided to take him for a walk. Maybe some fresh air would do me good. Maybe just getting out of the house would free me from whatever funk I'd found myself in. Our walk took me down familiar streets. Rusty was so happy that he was practically skipping. It was the first time he had really been out in a while, and you could tell that he didn't want it to end. He was absolutely enchanted by everything around him, and the more we walked, the better I felt, too. It was like I was a groundhog coming out of my den after a long winter, and the feeling made me happy. Rusty's mood was infectious, and I found myself beginning to skip the longer we went. People must have noticed because they were staring at us as we went about our walk, and I saw more than a few turn to mark us as we went by. It was great, the best walk I'd ever been on, the best walk in a long time, but it ended far too soon. It ended when we walked past that damn thrift store, my route taking me somewhere I hadn't noticed I was going. As we came to the window, I looked up without thinking, and that was when I saw it. He was just standing there. And I could see that he had a face and everything. The mannequin had transformed into me, completely and absolutely. He wasn't just wearing familiar clothes or familiar objects. He now looked exactly the way I did, down to the ripped pajama pants and the vintage superhero t-shirt that had been my pajamas since I was a teenager. He was looking out of the window at me, and as he caught my eye, I could swear he smiled. I stood there looking at him for what felt like an eternity, and Rusty had began to whine and look between me and the mannequin. He seemed confused, not used to seeing a perfect mimic of his owner, but as the mannequin sat forward and put his hands against the glass, I began to run back to my apartment. I noticed that people weren't staring like I'd thought they were. They were gawking at me as Rusty and I made our frantic way home. Some of them laughed, others looked at me with open disapproval, and I wondered what exactly they were seeing that made them feel like that. People knew me in this neighborhood. I had lived here for a long time. Long enough for people to remember who I was, at least, and as I closed the door to my apartment, I caught sight of myself in the mirror that hung over the key rack. My face was gone. Nothing but a flat mannequin face that had been staring out of the window at me for so many weeks now. I put my hands up to prove to myself that I wasn't just seeing things, but there was no denying that my features had completely gone. No matter how much I touched or where I put my hands, I couldn't find any features on my face. Not a nose or ears or anything. It's as if my face had just been wiped clean like a chalkboard. Can't begin to imagine how this could be or how it happened. I've been sitting on my couch since I got home, and I've made a grisly discovery. I can still see, though I have no eyes to see with. I can still breathe, though I have no mouth to breathe through. I worry that soon I'll begin to scream, though I have no mouth to scream. It's funny. That phrase never made any sense to me when I read that story in college. But now it seems to have come home in a big way. I don't know if the story is a warning or just the passing of information. But all I can say is that if a mannequin looks like you, don't count it as nothing. He may take more from you than just your fashion sense.
Truly a terrifying story of replacement. Coming up next, we have a story about a precocious mutt and the things he got up to after a hunting trip. Let's hear a story about why I left the woods.
Yeah, it's just me here tonight, I said as I washed up a few dishes. The darkness outside seemed held at bay by the big floodlight on the pole. The forest surrounding our little cabin looked like a green wave that was preparing to swallow our circle of humanity up forever. And it was only thanks to that 120-watt bulb that we were saved. I had the phone pressed against my ear, and I laughed as my boyfriend said something funny. The phone slipped towards the soapy water, and I caught it just in time as something scratched at the door again. What? Nah, they haven't come home yet. Uncle Ricky doesn't usually like to be out in the woods after dark. I opened the back door as another loud scratch came from it, and Benji walked in. The mutt had been with our family for years, and as he lumbered in, he wagged his tail and gave me a big doggy grin. I wrinkled my nose with disgust when I noticed that he'd been rolling in something. There was red-brown crust all over his right side, and at first I mistook it for blood. When I saw he wasn't limping, though, I figured it was just mud, or worse, blood off of some carcass he'd rolled around in the woods. I started after him as he made his way towards the laundry room where his food bowls were, my boyfriend prattling away in my ear. "Rick, I'm gonna have to call you back," I said, making my way towards the laundry room before Benji could roll around on the clean laundry. "Everything okay, babe?" "Yeah, but Benji rolled in something, and I don't want him to get it all over the house." "Okay, well, stay safe. Love you. Love you too, Rick. See you tomorrow." I hung up the phone and took a step towards the laundry room. I had just reached for the bristle brush by the sink when my phone blared from the countertop. I turned away from Benji and walked towards the phone, checking the caller ID to see who it was. Brad's smiling face was plastered across the screen, and I picked it up on the third ring. I figured it would be them telling me they were on their way and running late. I didn't get 3 words out, however, before I was immediately buffeted by a wall of static and Brad's frantic voice yelling as he cut in and out. I held the phone a little away from my ear, like it might explode. "Hello? Oh God, thank God, Rach. I need you to call the sheriff right now." His tone was equal parts terror and fury, and I was immediately worried. "What happened? Is everything okay?" "Uncle Ricky's hurt pretty bad, and Dad's not in the best shape either. Dad says to call the sheriff and get an ambulance. Lock the door until we get there." "Brad, what happened? Do it, Rachel. We'll be there in 5 minutes. Don't open the door for anyone until we get there." Then he hung up on me, and I was left looking at the silent brick. I tried the sheriff's office, but the phone just rang and rang before connecting me with static. The phone number for the ambulance did the same, and by this point, I was starting to get scared. Was there a problem with the phones in town? Had some disaster happened out in the woods that spilled over into town? As I went to lock the door, I saw the familiar headlights of Dad's old pickup coming up the driveway. I flung it open instead and went to help them. Dad came out of the back, hoisting Uncle Ricky under the arm, and Brad hopped out of the driver's seat and ran over to help him. Uncle Ricky hung limply between them, and I could see at a glance that he was not in good shape. His flannel shirt and jeans were covered in blood, and though it was hard to tell, I thought his left arm might be gone. Dad was covered in blood too, but it looked like some of it might be Uncle Rick's. He had 4 long claw marks running through his left eye, and it was swelling too badly for me to tell if the eye still worked. Brad shouted at me to get the door, and I complied as all 3 of them came running into the living room. In the light, it was easy to tell how bad Uncle Rick was. His arm was gone. The sleeve had been used to make a tourniquet around the stump, and his breathing was shallow as he lay on the couch in a state of unconsciousness. Brad said something about getting back for the guns, but Dad shut him down and sent us both to lock the doors. After the house was secure, Dad asked me if I'd called the sheriff or the ambulance. I told him about the strange static, and he swore loudly as he took his own cell phone out of his pocket. He dialed a number, and I could tell by his face that he was getting the same result. Finally, he swore and threw the phone against the wall. "I guess we're on our own," he said, and it was the most hopeless sound I'd ever heard come out of my daddy. Even when Mama died, he'd still kept a strong face on for us. "What's going on? What happened to Uncle Rick?" I asked. Dad looked over at Brad, and after a silent conference, Dad started to tell it. "We'd been hunting for most of the day. We hadn't caught a damn thing. Something was scaring the game off. We heard it walking around a few times and thought it was a bear. Your Uncle Rick said it smelled like a bear. So when the sun started going down, we decided it was time to pack it in. We started getting everything together. Right out of the blue, a doe steps out in the meadow. She looked around real skittish-like and starts cropping grass real quick. She clearly smelled whatever had been making that noise all day, but the deer has to eat, and she started filling her belly as quickly as she could. Your uncle sighted her up and dropped her real easy, and we figured at least we'd have one thing to show for our efforts. No sooner did we get to the edge of the meadow when a big old something comes crashing out. It grabbed our deer and bolted back into the woods like a bat out of hell. It kind of looked like a bear, I guess. The sun was setting and it was hard to tell, but it moved quicker than any bear I'd ever seen. Brad and I were just going to let it go, but Rick was mad as I'd ever seen him. He tore off after it, saying he was going to take that thing home instead. So we follow him, not wanting to leave him in the woods alone after dark, and we chased this thing into its cave. At that point, I was sure it was a bear, so we go creeping in, trying to surprise it. As the sun sets behind us, we see this thing hunkered over the deer, and it weren't no bear. It's wolfing at the deer, just slurping down big mouthfuls, and Rick gets real pale and starts gibbering about how it's the thing that we saw when we were kids. "Wait," I interrupted, you've seen this thing before?" Dad looked perturbed, but nodded. "Yeah, that's why Rick hated to go into the woods after dark. When we were teenagers, we were up in a stand hunting deer. Rick sights one before sunset, and he drops it, much like we had tonight. We're about to go get it when this big thing comes out of the woods and starts wolfing it down right there in the meadow. Well, you know your Uncle Rick. He always had a temper. So he pops off a shot at it. Hits it too, but that don't do nothing but piss it off. It comes roaring and charging up to the bottom of our tree and starts clawing and pushing until it topples it over. We jump out just as it hits the ground and just go tearing off running for the truck." "And that was what you saw today?" "Well," Dad hedged, "it was almost dark when we shot the deer, and we never got a good look at it. All I know is that's what chased us out of the woods, and Rick wouldn't go hunting with us for the next 3 years after that." He paused for a minute to make sure I was out of questions before continuing his story. "So with Rick gibbering, this thing looks up and sees us. I swear to you that it came up on its hind legs and walked like a man as it ran at us. Rick pops a shot off, probably just panic fire, but it just shrugs it off and lands on him. I saw his arm, rifle and all, go into its mouth, and I heard it crunch as it bit it clean off. Rick starts screaming, and we all start yelling. Before it can finish him off, though, Brad and I pepper it 4 or 5 times with buckshot. It must have dazed it, because it rolled off of Rick with a loud shriek and stumbled back towards the cave. It sounded like a man screaming, Brad said, and Dad nodded before going on. It starts flailing around in pain, and we grabbed Rick and start dragging him back towards the truck. This thing came after us, and it sounded like it was crashing through the trees the whole way. We couldn't move very fast. Each of us had an arm under Rick as we drug him along, and I swear it would have had us if it hadn't been for Benji." My blood suddenly ran cold. "Benji?" "Yeah, poor little guy. He's been with us the whole time. He didn't seem to want anything to do with that thing, but when it jumped on us again and raked my face, he started growling and lunges right at it. I hear them tearing and snarling at each other, and we just hightailed it back to the truck. It's a wonder we ever found it in the dark. Poor old Benji. He sacrificed himself so we could get away." Both Brad and my dad looked forlorn, but I just shook my head. "No, he didn't. He's right here." Dad gave me a funny look. What are you talking about?" "He came wandering in not long before you guys did." That's when I remembered the blood on his fur. There was no way he could outrun the truck. Hell, the only reason I hadn't questioned it was because I had forgotten he had gone with him. I looked back towards the kitchen door, and it creaked open as Benji's friendly grin poked through the gap. He strolled into the living room, his fur still a mess of blood and mud, and glanced around the room as his tail wagged and his big old doggy smile stretched across his face. When he stepped up on his hind legs, I thought for sure I was dreaming. Benji leapt across the living room, and when he hit the couch, he was no longer the cuddly mutt we'd all come to love. He was 200 pounds of sleek black fur and raking claws that reduced my family to a spray of blood and screams of mercy. I fell back from the scene, covering my eyes with my hands to block it all out. I could still hear every bone-wrenching yank, every blood-splattering swipe, and every watery gurgle as my family had their throats torn out. I was numb. My mind shrank away from the scene before me as I backpedaled until my back hit the wall of the cabin. I curled my knees up to my chest and put my head against my knees as I sank to the floor and waited for it to be over. I didn't care at that moment whether I lived or died. I only wanted it to end. I could feel myself crying as the living room became a killing field. And when it finally ended, I could hear the overpowering bray of my explosive sobs. My sobs stopped when I heard heavy footsteps walking towards me. I didn't look up. I didn't want to look up. But when the creature's hot breath puffed against the top of my head, I pulled my face away from my knees despite myself. His blood-smeared face was inches from mine, and I quickly buried my face against my knees again. It was leaning over me, my family's blood pattering onto my skin, and it was all I could do not to pass out from terror. We stayed like that for several minutes, until I couldn't take it anymore. I lifted my head and looked at this semi-feline face and asked the question, Why haven't you killed me yet?" His voice was high, like a bee that's been caught in a jar, and it hurt my ears to listen to him. "Because you helped me. For that favor, I will give you a favor in return. Leave my woods before sunset tomorrow, and I will allow you to continue to exist. Stay, and you will share the fate of your kin." Then he turned and walked out of the house on 2 legs. I was gone before the sun came up. I threw my clothes in a bag, took the pickup my brother had been careless enough to leave the keys in, and drove. My phone rang a few times, but I ignored it. The hardest was when Aunt Clara called, but after 3 days, even she stopped calling. They likely assumed I was dead too. I sold the truck before I left the state and haven't looked back. I drove until I couldn't see the forest anymore. I drove until I couldn't see 3 trees grouped close enough to obscure anything. And when the desert stretched out before me, I finally stopped. I'll make my life here now. I have no intention of ever leaving the desert again. I don't know what forest this creature calls its own, and I never want to find out.
I'm not a big one for skinwalker stories, but I really like that one. Coming up next, we have a man walking his dog on a snowy day when he encounters something a little bit out of the ordinary. Let's hear a tale about snow bunnies.
Washington State is a spot known for its snowy vistas and picturesque scenery this time of year, and my husky Max and I love it. The snow was part of the reason I moved here after doing my 8 years in the military, not wanting to see sand or feel heat for the rest of my natural life. I thought strongly about Alaska, but I wasn't in love with the price of supplies or the cost of living. So I moved here last February and got to enjoy a couple of months of snow before spring came in like a lion. The spring and summer were pretty mild that year, but I was eager to see the snow make a return appearance. By August, I was making preparations, winterizing my house, making sure I had ample firewood, and laying by supplies in case Max and I got snowed in. You know, the whole 9 yards.
So when I woke up one morning to snow pattering down on the front yard, I was excited. Max and I like to take walks, usually in the evening after my shift at the pop-up storage where I work security, and today Max was extra excited about the prospect of playing in the snow. He was waiting for me by the door when I got home, leash in his mouth and brushy tail wagging as he looked at me expectantly. The look made it very clear that he'd waited patiently all day to go for his walk, and he was ready to go blundering through the snow like the oversized puppy that he was. He had to wait for me to get out of my uniform and put on some walking clothes, but he bore it well. Soon we were traipsing through the winter wonderland, and Max was loving every minute of it. We stayed on leash until we got to a spot near the woods where I'd taken him before. It was a big open field that no one owned, at least to my knowledge, and when I let him off the leash, he was all smiles as he barreled into the snow. I'd brought a tennis ball with me, but after a few throws, he seemed more interested in something in the woods. I, too, had seen slight movement from the wood line, and as I watched him sniff around, something told me to clip his lead back on. Max was a good boy, but he was still prone to chasing. It wasn't too big a problem out here, but if he went blundering aimlessly through the snow, he could get hurt. I had taken the end of the leash, calling his name as I prepared to hook him up, when suddenly a perfectly white rabbit came bursting from the snowdrift. It was gorgeous. Its fur, the almost white of no color. There were some flecks on it, but I began to suspect that they might be dirt that had stuck to it. I was enchanted by the creature for half a second, but that was half a second too long for Max. He barked and ran at it, the rabbit taking off into the woods as Max ran off behind it. I took off too, cursing all the way as my feet crunched in the snow. I should have been faster to leash him. I should have known that he would chase when I saw the rabbit. But my hesitation at the sight of it had cost me. Max's footprints were pretty easy to find. A blind man could have trailed my dog pretty easily, and as I went deeper into the woods, I could hear him barking as he kept chasing that damn rabbit. I kept calling his name, hoping that he would come back, but the deeper I went, the more I thought I'd lost him. It took me some time. My adrenaline was running high, and I was worried about my dog, but as the sun started getting low and the woods started getting less visible, I began to feel something on the back of my neck. Not the snow. I had been feeling that for a while, but it was a feeling that something was watching me. As the sun sank lower and lower in the sky, I could see something big moving in the trees, just behind or to the side of me. I thought wolves at first, but I hadn't seen any report of wolves in the area. I knew there were bears, but they didn't usually bother people, and they were hibernating once the snow fell, weren't they? Whatever this was, it was bigger than any bear I'd ever heard of. I wondered if it might be a moose. They came down from Canada sometimes, but I couldn't think why a moose would be stalking me through the woods. Whatever it was solid white and making no effort to hide itself. It was like a moving snowbank, and whenever it saw me looking at it, the creature seemed to blend in with the white surroundings, making me second guess whether I'd actually seen it or not. I knew I had. I knew what I'd seen, but looking back to see nothing but all that white made me feel like I couldn't trust myself. I felt hunted, and that brought my survival instinct to the surface. A lot of my friends had come back from the war with PTSD or nervous conditions, but I'd been lucky in that respect. Instead, I'd developed a kind of sixth sense when it came to danger, and it put me in a state of heightened awareness. It had served me well in my time overseas, and now I felt myself slip into it, as whatever had my scent was stalking me. I kept calling Max, whistling and shaking his leash, but I was also being careful to listen for the sound of pursuit. A broken branch, a crunch of snow, the fall of powder as something brushed a tree. I was listening for them all, and the deeper I went, the more I heard it. Whatever was following me was not being particularly stealthy,
and I got the feeling that it wasn't used to being challenged out here. I put a hand to my waist where I had a small hunting knife strapped to my belt, and I was very happy I'd remembered it. It wouldn't do much against something that big, but it would give me some semblance of a fighting chance. I stopped often, listening for Max even as I listened for my mysterious pursuer. Every 10th step I would stop and listen, call my dog, and proceed again. The crunching of snow remained a constant, but it seemed that whatever it was had decided to keep its distance. I didn't know why. It could easily have taken me at a run and buried me under its weight, but it was being cautious, and that gave me some hope. If it was unsure about me, then maybe I could scare it away with one of the usual tricks. I was trying to remember what the best way was to scare a bear away, and landed on making yourself big before I remembered that was black bears. Black bears were native to the area, but couldn't see one of them following me this far. If it was a grizzly bear, then I was probably already in real danger. The method of avoiding brown bears was to play dead, but if it was hungry enough, I doubted even that would work. If it was a curious moose, then God only knew what I was going to do. I didn't want to think about something like a mountain lion or a cougar. I knew they had big cats here too, but I wasn't sure what kind or whether they would come out in the snow or not. The western United States had a versatile grab bag of predators to choose from, and I was now ankle deep in the snow, being pursued by one of them. I stopped and called again, whistling loudly as I listened for Max, and when I heard a faint, familiar bark, I felt a flutter of happiness. He was alive, something I hadn't been entirely sure of, but before I could take a step, I heard a very distinct noise of the ice breaking behind me. It was followed by a second something to my left, and I felt my heart flutter mutinously. I wasn't alone. I broke into a run then, hearing them pursue me and not caring. I wanted to find Max. I wanted to get him on a lead and get out of here as quickly as possible. As scared as I was, and I was scared, I still didn't want anything to happen to my buddy. Max was just a big dumb dog. He didn't know that chasing rabbits could get him on the wrong side of something out here. I should have foreseen this when I was getting obedience training for him. If I was lucky, this would be a live and learn situation. If I wasn't, then I guess Max's next owner would have to do better. If he made it out, that was. As I ran, I could hear them getting closer. Sounded like there were more than two now, and the more I ran, the more of them there seemed to be. Sounded like a whole herd of whatevers by the time I caught sight of Max, and I put on a burst of speed, my lungs burning as something loomed up before me. I got a good look at my pursuer, and if it hadn't been so damn cold, I would have screamed. Standing between me and my dog, looking huge on its back legs, was a polar bear. It was bigger than any polar bear I had ever seen, a Kodiak-sized polar bear, and as it opened its mouth to roar, nothing came out. It lifted its paws to swipe me down, looking to bury me under its bulk, and I was helpless to stop. I could no more have come to a halt than I could have taken a sharp right turn, and I threw my hands up in some feeble attempt to defend myself. As I collided with the massive bear, however, I was surprised to feel not warm, wet fur, but cold, hard-packed snow. Hard-packed or not, my velocity took me straight through it, and the snow bear fell to pieces as I landed on the other side. I looked back, watching it break apart in total awe, and that's when I saw them. A pack had been right. There were 20 of the solid white snow bears behind me, and they had frozen like a perfect array of snow sculptures amidst the trees. Each was an intricately carved piece capable of winning a prize contest in any winter show, and each had chunky white teeth that looked anything but inviting. As I stood crouched in the snow, I wondered why they hadn't charged. Why were they just standing there?
Did it only work if I wasn't looking at them? I didn't know, and I didn't care. Right then I could see Max barking and jumping around happily, and I wanted to get him back on his leash as fast as possible. Max was busy chasing the rabbit from earlier, but as he caught him and shook him viciously, I saw him fall into snowy pieces all around the dog. I ran up, wanting to get a leash on him before he could move off and maybe save the bunny if it was possible. As I came up to him, however, I saw that any body that might have existed was gone, and a new rabbit was slowly forming from the snowy ground. Max had bent to snap at this one too, but seemed to sense the approach of the snow creatures. Even as I attempted to coax him onto his leash, he growled, showing his teeth as his hackles came up, but I really didn't have time for him to test the stability of these snow animals. I'd barreled through one of them, but who knew if that was the norm? He acted confused as we ran into the woods, clearly not understanding why we were leaving, but as we ran, he seemed to think this was just another game. We ran flat out, trees whipping past us, and I could hear the animals coming up behind us. They weren't even trying to be subtle now. They were crunching through the snow like a pack of hungry animals, and when we broke through the trees and onto the road, I turned for home and kept hoofing it until our front door was in sight. I didn't let myself stop moving until the door was behind me and the locks were thrown. I don't go out as often as I used to, and after some research, I found a dog park in the neighborhood that I could take Max to. It's nowhere near the woods, and that seems to suit the both of us just fine. We had both had enough of the woods and decided that the snowy park was just fine. I did a little research and discovered that the woods I had run through often saw bodies turn up in the spring beneath the snowdrift. No one is quite sure why it is, but I feel like I may have some idea. It isn't just people either. I read the report, and they find a lot of dogs out there as well. Some of them have collars, some of them are strays, but there's a lot of missing people that are found with leashes in hand. I couldn't tell you what we found in the woods, but I'm glad to have survived it. It was one of the most frightening experiences of my life, and 8 years of that life was spent in an active war zone. No fear of death compares to being pursued through the woods by something that's hunting you for no better reason than sport. And there's nothing quite like being the prey as the winter wind deadens your lungs and the chill conquers your senses. Keep your eyes peeled if you walk the woods once the snows fall. Otherwise, they might find you too once the snows melt in the spring.
I get told pretty often that that's not the snow bunnies everyone was expecting, but I'm glad I could, go around your expectations a little there. Coming up next, we have a story about a guard dog who's there to protect a very particular home. Let's all be sure we read the signs and beware of dog.
Should have been an easy score. Rob an old man, leave without much fuss. We never could have guessed how south it would go. Everyone had heard of Duncan Adams. He'd been a fixture in the community for generations, living in that wild old house up on Mount Yaller. He'd been a writer, a professor of antiquities at Georgia State College, and any number of other things. His house was supposed to contain all sorts of expensive things, and we were going to see if the rumors were true. Mike didn't like it, though. Guy like that is certain to have all sorts of security, the best measures money can buy, and you just expect the four of us to walk in like it's nothing. Julius, Gavin, Mike, and I like to call ourselves a crew, but that was just from watching too many heist movies. In reality, we were just four guys who like to break into people's houses and steal things. We weren't druggies, we weren't criminals, despite what our records said. But we did like to buy nice things, and stealing often paid for them better than a real job. You'd think so, I said, but my brother went up there to do a job and said that there were no security systems, no cameras,
no nothing. The dude is just asking to get robbed, and I say we take him up on it. My youngest brother's a plumber, and that was actually where I got the idea for the job. He got called about a month ago to fix some pipes in the old man's bathroom, and came back to tell us how cool the place was. He had all these mirrors on the grounds, and in the house, and on the walls, and it was like a fun house. It was really cool looking, he said. The old man had paid him a mint to do the job, and I'd spent the next 3 weeks thinking about that house and planning the biggest heist that I could imagine. The plan is that we go in just after dark and jump the sidewall. We can go in through the garden out back and come out on the back porch and into the house. The old man's a hard sleeper. My brother said he had to ring the bell 12 times before he woke up. We can go in and out before he even knows we're there and live like fat rats off the spoils. Mike still wasn't sure, but greed was slowly eroding his sense of self-preservation. He said he would bring it to a vote with the rest of the crew, and later that afternoon he called to say that the vote had been carried unanimously. The other two were in, and Mike wasn't about to hold us up with some tickling feeling of doubt. Hope your intel's right, because if you're not, we're all going to be royally screwed. And that was how we came to be hunkered in the scrub around the Duncan Adams estate, waiting for it to get good and dark. We were all dressed in dark clothes, Jules and Gavin wearing ski masks, while Mike and I just had our hoods pulled up. I was pretty sure that we wouldn't need cover, but Jules had 2 prior arrests, and Gavin was clean for the moment. Both wanted to stay out of prison, if they could help it, and had opted to cover their faces. As the dark began to settle around us, we kept to the fence and prepared to vault over. It was just a simple concrete wall, no lights or cameras on the top. But Mike stopped before making a stirrup with his hands to point at a sign on the wall. You didn't say nothing about a dog. I looked at the sign, wrinkled my brow as I tried to remember if Lewis had mentioned a dog. He hadn't. He'd said nothing about any kind of animals on the property, but a dog could complicate things. The sign was the usual black and yellow one that bore the legend, "Beware of dog," on it, but it looked a little faded, and I suddenly wondered if it was something from a while ago. It's probably old. Lewis didn't say anything about a dog or a cat or anything to do with animals. Mike seemed unsure, but I doubled down. Tell you what, I'll go first and drop behind the gate. If there's a dog, it'll just tear me up, and I'll find some way to get out, or you guys can run. We'll only be out for the gas it took to get us here, and I'll have spent a night in jail, worst case scenario. Mike still looked unsure, but he made a stirrup with his hands, and I vaulted over the wall and landed in a well-kept backyard. It had been landscaped to look oriental, maybe Japanese or something, and there was a bridge over a little creek and a well-cared-for walkway that led to the back of the house. There was a sand pit with rocks in it, some trees cut to resemble bonsai trees, and several large reflective columns interspaced around. It was definitely different, but I liked it the longer I stood waiting to get mauled by a Rottweiler or a pit bull. "What do you see?" Mike whispered, as I scanned the area for a slobbering beast that was just waiting to strike. "Nothing. Well, not nothing, but no dog. Come on over. I think it's safe." They dropped over one at a time, Mike reaching back to pull Gavin over before landing himself. They all stared at the strange little garden, so alien in the twilight, and when no lights came on to mark them, and no dog came out to chase us away, we all sighed collectively. "Looks like there wasn't a dog after all," Julia said. "Or he's inside," Mike said skeptically. "Whatever. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. We gotta get inside first," I reminded them, as we set off across the little garden path. It was a little eerie to walk across the shadowy garden with only the moon to guide us. The place seemed to be made of strange angles, and the reflective monoliths didn't help matters much. They were everywhere, a new one jutting up every 7 or 8 feet, and they played strange games in the moonlight. I would catch myself looking at them out of the corner of my eye, and more than once I had to turn and make sure something wasn't following us. The reflections created strange shadows, and I was sure I saw something dart out of sight before turning to find nothing and nowhere that it could have gone. "These things are weird," Julius said, keeping his voice pitched low. "I could swear I keep seeing something in them, but it's gone when I look." "Me too," Gavin said, sounding a little unnerved. "Eyes on the prize, boys," I reminded them, but I didn't sound as sure as I tried to convey. The backyard hadn't looked very big, but as we moved towards the house, it seemed to go on forever. We were staying low, trying not to draw attention to ourselves, but it seemed like we should have been there by now. Whenever I looked at the back porch, it always seemed to be about 50 feet away, and every step seemed to bring us no closer. "What the hell was that?" Gavin asked, and his voice was too high. Julius shushed him, whispering back, "What are you talking about?" "There it was again, right there, I saw it," Gavin said, pointing at one of the polished monoliths. I glanced at it, but it was just a flat reflection of the weird trees sitting on the back wall. "There's nothing there, Gav. Get it together, man. In a few hours, we'll be leaving with more loot than we can carry. Then you can freak out if you still want to." Gavin looked unsure, but he nodded and kept pace as we made our way through the collection of old trees and topiaries. He wasn't the only one getting a little nervous, though. I could see something in those reflections, too. Something I was beginning to think might be our dog. It was big. Way too big to go vanishing like it always seemed to. It was a mastiff or a wolf hybrid or something, and the longer we trekked through the garden, the closer it seemed to get to us. At first it was just curiously observing us, seeing what we were doing, and enjoying its little game of startling us. As we neared the house, though, the game changed. Now it was getting closer to our group, weaving between the statues and plants, getting bigger as it stalked us. I still wasn't sure how it was doing that. The thing had to be nearly 5 feet tall on all fours, but it would disappear any time I turned to look behind me. I wondered if there was some sort of electrical gadget in these things, maybe a display mount to scare intruders, but when I looked right at the polished mirror front, I saw nothing but my own reflection and the larger-than-usual bonsai topiary behind me. I'd like to tell you that we made it to the house before things went sideways, but that's not true. Truth was, we never even saw the inside of the house. We came within about 10 feet of the back porch, a trip that seemed to take longer than it should have, when the purpose of the monoliths became apparent. We were hunched around some of the oddities of the garden, trying to get our nerve up before heading in. Gavin and I weren't the only ones that had been seeing things out of the corner of our eyes, and nerves were high as the goal came into view. Now the real work would begin, but we weren't sure what to expect from this funhouse garden. Would we be allowed to make it to the house? Would we be mowed down by some huge hound on our way to the porch? I didn't know, but suddenly this didn't seem like the easy score I had promised them. "Jules," I whispered, "go see if the back door is unlocked." "Why have I got to do it?" Jules asked, his nerves jangling a little. "'Cause you're the closest to the door. Just get up there and see." Jules looked at the house like it was the absolute last place he wanted to go, but greed still had its teeth in him. We could still make something of this, still come out okay, and he scampered up the porch steps with all the stealth he could muster. The doors were glass, fronting on a huge glassed-in kitchen, and when Jules reached out for the handle, he seemed as shocked as we were when it pulled down easily. Damn, guy's not even... But as he took his eyes off the glass, I saw something loom up behind him, something that made me tremble. It was the dog, a huge black hellhound with a gaping maw full of sharp teeth and piercing red eyes. It was behind the glass, and I thought for sure that it would jump through and bury Jules with its bulk. I started to yell, started to warn him, but when it leaned out of the glass and snapped its teeth around him, I was surprised by the lack of a crash. Jules looked surprised, too, his shock absolute, and when the creature yanked him into the glass and out of sight, we were left in stunned silence, with only the crickets for company. "What the hell was that?" Gavin said, his voice trembling audibly. "I don't know," Mike said, his voice inches behind me as he inched away with every breath, "but I'm not sticking around to find out." He was off and running then, tearing back towards the wall we'd come over. He looked scared enough to jump it without any help, and when I called for him to stop, I winced as a light came on in the house. Great, we'd woken up the old man. Gavin saw the light and took a few steps back himself, but when Mike screamed suddenly, Gavin and I froze as we turned back to see what had happened. In the fleeting rays of the porch light, I saw Mike caught beneath the massive paws. It was coming from the surface of a polished square, and as the head emerged, the beast looked as big as a grizzly bear. The fur was wiry and stiff, something I believe they called brindled in the dog world, and its muzzle was already dripping with blood. It bent down over Mike, the poor guy screaming and thrashing as much as his smushed lungs would allow, and when it covered his head with its mouth, the crying and yelling was cut off abruptly. It took Mike's head with it, but was nice enough to leave the body behind as it disappeared into the polished surface of the brooding rectangle. Gavin and I just stood there for a minute, unsure of what to do. When the door to the back porch opened, we both got low as we tried to hide from whoever had come to check on the ruckus. "Who's there?" said a voice that had probably once been a little more impressive. Age had done it no favors, and now it was a little less impressive, a little less commanding, but the owner seemed to know that he wasn't the most dangerous creature in the garden. The sound of a cane thumping on the boards could be heard, and when he saw the body, he croaked out a rough laugh. "Decided to come and steal from an old man, huh? You didn't think you were the first, did you?" I looked at Gavin as we hid, trying to tell him to be still, though he seemed to be losing that particular fight. "More than a few people have thought that they could come and plunder what I've rightfully taken in my prime. They see an old man living alone and think to make his home their find of the century. They never guess that the most dangerous thing here might be my own biggest find." As we watched, the old man put out a hand, and the hellish beast stuck its nose out of the window it had sucked Jules into, so the old man could scratch it like any other dog. "I was excavating a tomb in Russia when I found them. These strange black monoliths were just in a cave towards the back of the old tomb. I had never seen anything like them or the beast they held, but it had enough intelligence to understand me when I made it an offer. It didn't seem to be enough that he was going to kill us. The old codger meant to monologue before his hell beast devoured us. 'Come back to my home,' I said. 'Come into the lighted world again, and I will take you from this place and let you hunt my enemies for me.' And so I have. It has hunted a long time on would-be thieves and robbers, and eaten well in the process. You will be no different." Gavin looked at the back wall, a path that would take him over the unmoving corpse of Mike, and seemed to be trying to decide if it was worth the risk. I shook my head at him, trying to tell him not to, but when he suddenly sprinted across the lawn, I found myself right behind him. I could no more stop myself from fleeing in my terror than he could, and we dodged around the monoliths at every opportunity. The hound lunged at us nonetheless, coming out of either side as it tried to stop us. We were neck and neck, nearly to the wall, when Gavin suddenly tripped. I looked back and found that Gavin's foot was stuck in a trap too devilish to escape. The creature had him by the ankle, and as it dragged him backwards, I sprinted for the wall and leapt at the top. My fingers burned as they tried to dig into the concrete, and I'm not ashamed to say that I left a few fingernails behind as I scrambled over the top. I drove home, expecting that the creature or the police would come after me every mile of the way. When it didn't come lunging out of my rearview mirror and no blue and whites dogged my heels, I breathed a sigh of relief. I drove home, locked all the doors in my trailer, and went to my room so I could write this down while it's still fresh. Now that I have, I'm not sure what to do. Do I call the police? What would I even tell them? Can that thing get me through my own mirror? My computer monitor? The surface of my spoons? I don't know what to do. But I do know one thing. If you ever hear of Duncan Adams and his strange house in the mountains, and think that an old man living alone will be an easy score, think again. The dog that he has can't be bribed with treats and pets, and all you'll have from that place is death for you and anyone who comes along with you.
One more story for you, and I think I've saved the best for last. It's a emotional story about a good boy who finds his forever home, though it's maybe not where he had expected to end up. Let's hear a story about being out to pasture.
I knew there was no way I could have seen him, but I could swear I saw my old dog, Blue, standing near the fence of Sanders' farm. I work out of town, the town I grew up in being pretty tiny, and I have to pass Sanders' farm anytime I come home from work. Sanders' farm has been a landmark since before I was born, and it grows most of the produce for town. Herschel Sanders runs a very successful produce stand in town and sells crops to grocery stores all over the state. He's a bit of a local celebrity, and he seems to be the only person in town doing well for himself besides Cotton's Antiques. He also owned the farm my parents were supposed to have dropped Blue off to when I was a kid. Blue had been a good dog, a great companion for a kid my age, but maybe a little too rambunctious for my parents' liking. He'd been a mutt with pointy ears, a thick coat of soft brown fur, and a pair of green, inquisitive eyes that never seemed to get tired of darting around for something to chase or catch. I loved him, but for two adults in a small house, we lived in an apartment at the time, he must have been a nightmare. The day he bit Tommy was probably one of the worst days I remember, so, of course, it was indelibly etched in my memory forever. Tommy was a lot older than me or my friends. He was 12, and we all lived in fear of him. Whenever he strode onto the little playground area off the apartment complex, 5'8" and broad in the chest, we all usually left to go play somewhere else. Unfortunately, on that day, I was playing alone on the basketball court, and didn't have time to escape. I'd been shooting baskets. I wanted to join the elementary school basketball league next year, so I wanted to get good. That's when Tommy came striding up. Blue was panting about good-naturedly, but looked up when he saw Tommy coming. He was always alone, never having any chums to play around with, and that should have been a red flag to any adult that had been watching. Even the most brutal of children have someone to pal around with, but Tommy was too antisocial and stupid mean for even other bullies to accept. "What you doing, sissy?" he asked, dragging out his limited insults he reserved for sissies or babies. I told him I was just shooting baskets, and he sneered like that was the silliest thing he'd ever heard. "That's not how you get better, stupid. Why don't you play me one-on-one? That'll get you better quicker." I agreed, thinking maybe he had decided to be friendlier. Nothing could have been further from the truth. The game started out with him taking the ball from me and scoring point after point. I was smaller than him, so it was easy for him to steal the ball from me and rack up points while I stumbled around. After a while, I started developing some strategies to get around him, though, and I started making some points on my own. Before I knew it, we were nearly tied, and this was unacceptable to Tommy. The game had been dirty before, but now it was downright brutal. The first time he pushed me, I heard Blue growl a warning. The second time he pushed me, I heard Blue snarl at him. On the third time, his fist coming down to crack me on the side of the head, I heard him yell as Blue sank his teeth into Tommy's backside. Tommy cried out, telling me to get my dog off him. I was shocked. I'd never seen Blue bite anyone. He hung onto the back of his jeans, worrying at him, as Tommy ran off the blacktop towards his house.
He let him go as his sneakers left the court, and I laughed about it then, Blue grinning his doggy grin as he came back to rub against my hand. When the police arrived at my house later that day, I didn't think it was so funny. They told us that Tommy's parents had reported a dog bite. Specifically, they had reported that Blue had bitten their son, and now the police had come to take him away. I told them my side of the story, all the while clutching Blue around the neck, but it didn't seem to make any difference to them. A dog had bit, and now he had to be put down. I think Dad saw that I was getting really upset, because he agreed to take Blue to the police station and said he wouldn't let them put him to sleep unless I got to say goodbye. This soothed me a little, but I was still pretty upset as I watched my dog walk away for the last time. When Dad came back, it was already nighttime, but he seemed a little happier. He told me that he had come to an understanding with the police officers, and they had let him drop Blue off at Sanders' farm. Dad said that Mr. Sanders usually took in troubled dogs, or dogs that were going to be put down, and let them work on his farm as farm dogs. That way, Blue could live there, and he wouldn't have to be put to sleep. He'll have all kinds of room to run around, much, much more room than this little apartment, and he'll be happy, Dad had said. I was ecstatic. I was sad that Blue couldn't live with us anymore, but at least the police wouldn't have to put him to sleep. I asked Dad if we could go visit him sometime, to see how he was doing, and Dad said we would see. I went to bed that night and dreamed about Blue as he ran and ran on the farm, herding sheep and running off crows and enjoying his life now that he had a lot of space to play in. I asked Dad a few times if we could go see Blue, but it never seemed to be a good time. Dad always said things like he didn't want to distract him while he was at work, or he didn't want to make it hard for him to settle in by reminding him about his old family. I understood these things. They made sense, but I really wanted to see Blue again. I remember asking a handful of times, but like most kids, my attention span was pretty limited. I got a new game console that year for Christmas. I made the basketball team, so I had to practice almost every day. I was getting ready to go to middle school, so I was a little worried about that. And after a while, I just sort of forgot about Blue. I never really forgot about him. I still thought about him sometimes, in that vague way that kids often do. But I just stopped asking to go see him. Eventually, I guess I stopped thinking about him. Until today, when I saw him on the fence, I hadn't honestly thought about him in years. I was heading to dinner with my parents after work, so I figured I'd let them know what I'd seen. They might like knowing that Blue was okay, and that he was still living a good life. Mom opened the door for me when I knocked, and invited me to help finish fixing dinner. As I chopped vegetables for a salad, I told her what I'd seen, but she didn't seem to understand. The chunk of the knife seemed soothing as it cut the vegetables, and I told her that I'd seen Blue running around the farm where we'd left him. She still seemed a little confused, not really understanding what I was talking about, and when Dad came in, I told him as well. Dad didn't seem confused at all, though. Quite the contrary. He looked a little scared. You saw Blue at Sanders' farm? Yeah, just where you said you dropped him off. He looked really happy. He was running around, chasing birds, and living his best life. He looked up when I drove past and almost seemed to recognize me. I was thinking that I might go visit him, see if he's still... Kid, Dad stated, cutting me off. That's impossible. I guess you're right, I said, thinking it over as we talked about it. Blue would have to be 20 years old by now. Maybe it's one of his puppies. It looks just like him. I might stop by anyway, see if maybe Mr. Sanders will sell me one of Blue's puppies. It would be nice to have a reminder of old Blue around the apartment. My dad sat down heavily, and that made me look up at him with real worry. He seemed like he was debating something, or maybe having a hard time accepting something. I was worried for a minute that he might be having a heart attack. He'd had one last year, and after that his heart hadn't exactly been stable. Instead, he just looked up at me like he might have seen a ghost or something. That's not possible, because Blue is dead. I looked at him in shock. How do you know? Did Mr. Sanders tell you when He didn't have to. Blue died the night I took him to the police station. We put him down. My head spun a little. Had they been lying to me this whole time? Dad had told me he'd taken Blue to the farm. He had stuck to that story till eventually I forgot. Had he just been telling me a lie to stop me from being upset? Why had he told me about taking Blue to the farm at all? Sit down. I think it's time I tell you the truth. It's the truth you may have to face yourself one day, so it's best you hear it now.
I sat down, keeping a close eye on my old man, who suddenly seemed less trustworthy than he had a few minutes ago. People in this town always say that they're taking their dogs to the farm. It's been a tradition for at least as long as I can remember. My own dad told me he was taking my dog Scout to Sanders' farm when he got too old and too sick. He said that Scout could run and play for as long as he wanted, and the country air would do him some good. My daddy had never lied to me before, at least not that I knew of, and I was happy that Scout could live somewhere where he could get better. He was old and really sick. I wasn't quite ready to say goodbye to him yet, though. Daddy said we could visit him, but we never did. Eventually, just like you, I kind of forgot about him and went on with my life. I sat in silence, not really sure what to make of all this. So Granddad had lied as well, but this seemed to be a generational lie. Why did so many people use Sanders Farm as a place to leave their dogs? Was it a convenient lie? Or was there more to it? Why did you lie to me? I asked, still not happy about being misled. Because I knew that Blue was going to be killed, and I knew that you weren't ready to lose him. Taking him to the farm was just something people tell kids around here. I'd imagine that you have a lot of friends who've had their dogs taken to Sanders Farm over the years. But why? What's the point of it all? Dad seemed to think about this, weighing his options before settling on, "You'll understand when you're older, when you have kids of your own. Sanders Farm is an important place in this community for many reasons, some of them not quite known even to the people who use it." I didn't end up staying for dinner. I left, despite my mother's protests, and drove home. I don't know why, but I was just so irrationally mad about being lied to. I realized, of course, that my parents had lied like this before. I've lived with the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy, Santa Claus, and even a monster that lived in the basement named Mr. Giles, who would get you if you came downstairs after bedtime. They all turned out to be fake, of course. They were lies they told, but lies that they told gently, and only to add magic to my childhood or keep me from doing foolish things. I could understand those lies, but not this one. This one felt different. This one felt personal. I flopped onto the couch when I got home, and John paused his game as he glanced over at me. "What's wrong, babe? You look upset." "It's nothing," I lied, looking away before finally spilling the whole sad story. I was in tears by the end, my boyfriend holding my hands and patting them gently. He'd grown up here too, and had known my parents only slightly less time than I had. He often gave me some perspective on what was going on, and was my voice of reason in many things. "I'm sure your dad had a good reason. He's a good man, and I don't feel like he'd lie to you for no reason. He probably just wanted to protect you. You were 8 after all." He slid his thumbs over the backs of my hands like I liked, and I smiled as I bent forward to kiss his forehead. "Thanks, hon. You always know just what to say." John grinned through his beard and reached for the controller again. Boy-friendly duties now complete. Besides, it's not all that weird if you think about it. I cocked an eye at him. "What do you mean?" "Well, that's where my dad took Russell after he got hit by that car. He told me he took him to Mr. Sanders' farm so he could get better, but I guess he never did." That gave me pause. John had basically told me the same story my dad had, and it was a little too similar for coincidence. As John went back to rolling and smashing anything that wandered into his field of vision, I opened my phone and sent a text to my friend Matt. Matt and I had been friends nearly as long as John and I had, and I trusted him as much as I trusted my boyfriend. "Hey Matt, just wondering if you've ever heard your parents say anything about taking one of your pets to Sanders Farm. Just curious, trying to settle a bet." The last bit would really hook him. He seemed to like making John look dumb by proving him wrong. I watched John play Elden Ring for a few more minutes before my phone buzzed and I picked it up to see his reply. "Wow, that's weird. Yeah, my dad took Snoopy there after he got too old to walk. I haven't thought about that in forever. That's trippy." I thanked him and sent a text to Jane, a friend from work. Jane lived in the next town over, but Kine was still only about 20 minutes from my hometown. I was wondering if this was just a regional thing, or if it extended farther than our little burg. Janet sent back a string of question marks and asked why I needed to know something so weird. I told her it was to settle a bet too, and she told me she'd never had a dog get taken to Sanders Farm. "We always just buried them in the backyard," she said. Okay, so maybe it wasn't particularly far-reaching. For the next few hours, as John cursed and growled at the maddening boss he was trying to beat, I sent text after Facebook message after Twitter message and everything in between to old school friends and people I knew from town to ask them if they'd lost dogs too. John's story about Russell had made me realize this was bigger than just my family, and I wanted to know how far exactly. Of the 10 people I got responses from, 6 said their parents had told them they were taking dogs to Sanders' farm. One friend only had cats growing up, and it appeared that they didn't get to live a happy life on Sanders' farm. The other 2 had never been allowed to have pets, so they'd never had anything to lose. The one person whose dog hadn't gone to Sanders' farm had escaped while the family was on vacation, so the whereabouts of the dog were never discovered. The findings were inconclusive, but they were still pretty damn close. Close enough that as John and I climbed into bed that night, I had already decided that I was going to make a stop on my way home from work tomorrow. The plume of dirt that spewed up behind me as I drove up the long driveway to Sanders' farm was the only bell the old farmer seemed to need. He was waiting for me on the porch with a glass of tea, and a weathered old smile spread across his sunburnt face. "Afternoon, kid. What can I do for you?" We shook hands as I introduced myself, and he handed me the glass of tea as I explained why I was there. Mr. Sanders nodded, asking if I'd like to come inside. He didn't seem surprised by the question at all. Quite the contrary. It was as if he'd been waiting for me to come and ask it all this time. I told him that I thought I'd rather sit on the porch and discuss it, and he nodded as he took a seat in one of the old rockers, indicating that I should take the other. Every now and again, someone puts 2 and 2 together and realizes that everyone brings their dogs to Sanders' farm. It's not a new concept. People have been doing it since before the Great Depression. I can't tell you how long it's been going on, but I can tell you how it started if you'd like to hear. I nodded, and he began his story. The first dog to be brought here wasn't really brought at all. His name was Jip, and he was my friend. He was just a pup when I heard him crying one afternoon. He'd gotten himself stuck in a trap, and his pack had deserted him, probably thinking he was done for. He was just a little half-starved thing, but he growled at me as I came to get him loose. Turned out I didn't have to do too much. The trap had nearly tore his front paw off, and he was bleeding out. It seemed a shame to let him die, so I held him down and tied his foot off with a handkerchief. He struggled a lot, snapping and snarling as I tried to stop the bleeding, but eventually he quieted down as the blood oozed out of him and he became less coherent. I scooped him up and took him back home, cutting the little bit of skin off that held his paw on and dressing it as best I could. I was afraid he had died for a little while, but when I heard him come to, snarling and snuffling and howling, I knew he'd likely recover. He smiled as he remembered it, likely thinking of the little wolf pup as he tried to act twice his size. We started off slow, but eventually I earned his trust. His paw would never grow back, but he managed to teach himself to walk with 3 legs. I had done a good enough job of cleaning it up that it didn't get infected, and after a few months the lack of a paw didn't seem to slow him down. He couldn't return to his pack. I'm not sure he ever even tried, but he was my dog after that, and I loved him. His smile became sad, and I felt we were about to come to the part of the story where he lost that friend. We lived together for about 12 years, both of us growing old as the seasons passed. Jip's gait was slower, and his joints creaked when he walked, but he was still always willing to walk around with me when I did my work. I was in my late 40s, working the land as I do now, when we stumbled upon a bear one day. He had decided to bed down in my corn crib, and when I went down to check my stores, he woke up and charged me. Jip got between us. He was never far from my side, and gave me time to get my rifle. I put the bear down as the 3-legged wolf kept him from attacking me, but the damage was done. Jip had been slashed a dozen times, and I sat with him as he lay bleeding on the dirt floor of my storehouse. Mr. Sanders got a far-off look as he watched the sun sink, seeing far-off days as the sun set over his crops. I buried him in the field, the place he loved the most. I'd built him a house, put him a ratty blanket on the porch, but he seemed to love sleeping amongst the swaying corn plants and amidst the dirt of the field. I buried him there,
thinking he might nourish the crops as his spirit lay content. But I never could have foreseen what would happen. That night, I heard a loud barking, a barking that sounded like Gyp's. I rushed out with my rifle and found him smiling and barking at the edge of the field, good as new. Behind him, though, the crops had grown 4 times as plentiful. Corn and beans and squash and potatoes, everything else I grew in those days, too. Gyp looked at me as though to say, "Thanks for a good life," and then he dove back into the field and I never saw him again. That was how it started. "Well, what started?" I asked, feeling my skin prickle. "The crops came in, and I brought my wares to the nearest market. I made enough money to build a new barn, buy a new horse, and eat like a king that winter. There had been enough food to stuff my storehouse, and the excess I'd taken to market was more like a normal yield from any other year. The next year I planted as I had every year, and old Gyp brought in another bountiful harvest. I bought more land, made plans to plant an orchard, began to think about buying cattle and sheep. I even thought about becoming some kind of land baron in this underdeveloped part of the country. The next 2 years were just as fine, but I was in for a surprise." He coughed a little and asked me if I'd get him a glass of tea from the kitchen. I obliged, moving into the house and taking a glass from the cabinet as I moved to the battered old fridge. I refilled my own as I poured the cold tea into the new glass. I was suddenly very thirsty, and my throat felt dry as a bone. When I brought it back to him, he thanked me before taking a long sip. After 4 years of amazing yield, the 5th year was a disappointment. The crops did well as they ever did before Gyp died, but the bounty was nowhere to be seen. I had just begun planting the fruit trees and just started making inquiries about livestock. I worried that I wouldn't be able to afford any of the plans I'd been making, and that temporary success might just slip through my fingers. The next year was much the same, but I had noticed a small decline in the quality of my produce. There had been no blight, no insects to speak of, but the crops seemed weaker, more feeble this year. I began to panic. What would I do if the field stopped making? What could I do if the vegetables stopped coming? I tried different things that spring to rejuvenate the fields. I bought tonics from a traveling man. I put down fertilizer. I tried increasing the water I gave the fields. The fertilizer, however, had made me remember that I had used something very different to fertilize the land 4 years ago, and that made me wonder if doing so might rejuvenate the fields again. The sun was sinking lower now, the fiery ring just over the tops of the corn as they waved merrily. And so I set out to find a proper sacrifice for the land, something to bring it back again. I tried forest animals. Gyp had been of the forest after all, but to no avail. I tried strays from the nearby town, but they did nothing. In my desperation, I'm ashamed to say that I bought and killed animals from the local stableman, even going so far as to buy and slaughter a horse, but they did little to rejuvenate the crop. Then one evening, as I came back from the market with my pathetic yield, I nearly struck a child as he came bounding into the road. The dog with him, just an average mutt, pushed him out of the way, and my tires crunched over the animal. I heard the boy cry out in despair as he cradled the dying dog in his arms. Its back was clearly broken, but I wasted no time. I took the dog with me, driving away quickly as the father came rushing out to see what all the fuss was about. The setting sun cut fire lines across his eyes, and the sting must have been uncomfortable, if not eye-watering. Mr. Sanders seemed not to notice, though. He was dead by the time I arrived home, and I buried him in the field, as I had with Gyp. The crops came back, the land thrived, and I think that was when I realized what the land wanted. The old dog had been loved, just as Gyp had been loved, and that love seemed to nourish the land like nothing else. From that day on, I seemed to always have my eyes peeled for dogs. The sick ones could sometimes be taken off the owner's hands, but I had been known to buy them from struggling families as well. As the years went by and the town grew, so too did my prosperity.
I was one of the largest farmers in the region. My produce sold at every general store and market for miles around. I've seen the horses replaced by automobiles, seen the carts that came to get my food replaced by trucks, and all the while, my fields continue to put out more of the stuff I needed to grow. But there was a price, and the price has become quite steep over the years. I was still mulling over what he had said, and when he paused to drain the dregs of his glass, I asked the question that had been wavering on the edge of my mind. Mr. Sanders, how old are you? Mr. Sanders fixed me with a mischievous grin, and it took years off of him. Just starting to put it together, eh? I was born in 1815. I bought this land in 1845. The year I buried Gyp, I was 45, and I have stayed that age ever since. Despite having more crops than I know what to do with, the land also grants me life for my sacrifice. I can't explain why, and I can't explain how, but I keep living as long as the land thrives. I wanted to deny what he was saying, but I could find no argument against it. The man looked old, sun-weathered, but not ancient. How would he manage to keep from being noticed? If he had really owned this farm for so long, how had no one seen? As my farm grew, so too did the town. The market thrived, the people prospered, and thus began the agreement. I had grown tired of finding my own sacrifices, so I made them a deal. They would bring me their dogs, those who were sick or those who were too old to carry on, and I would continue to make the town flourish. By that time, I was making a sacrifice once a month. Today, I make a sacrifice once a day. Before too long, I fear that it will become unmanageable, and the farm will fail. I said nothing, just sitting and staring, wishing I could believe that this man was crazy. I suppose that wouldn't be too bad. I've grown tired of living and making sacrifices, and maybe it's finally time to rest. Nothing lasts forever, after all, not even immortality, he said, grinning. The grin made his face look skeletal, his true age shining through at last. I thanked him for the tea, thanked him for the story, and stood up shakily. Take care of yourself, kid, and don't worry. Old Blue is as happy as any other dog here. You did what you could for him, and now he's at rest where no one can hurt him ever again. I nodded dumbly, my legs shivering as I walked down the stairs to my car. As I climbed in, I thought I saw a familiar brown snout as it poked from the rows of corn plants. My hands froze halfway to the ignition. He was grinning at me, looking out through the corn and panting happily. It was as if he had come back one last time to say goodbye, and as we locked eyes, he slid slowly back into the field. I've driven by that farm once a day since, but I've never seen Blue again. I do worry, though, about what will happen to all those ghosts if something should happen to Sanders' farm. The crops have begun to look a little different lately, less healthy, more like plants that are rotting from the inside. If the vegetables die, if the farm fails, then what will happen to all those spirits that call the land their home? There was a sign next to the dirt road today that said, "For sale by owner." I suppose soon we may very well find out.
And just like that, our stories are at an end for another day. But don't worry, we'll be back tomorrow with more great stories for you here on Cozy Horror. Till then, this is Dr. Plague, wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.